3 men vanished without a trace, and the sea kept silent. On the edge of the North Atlantic, where storms rise like mountains and the sea devours the land, stand the lonely Flannan Isles. Remote, unwelcoming, and battered by endless waves, they were home to a single light, a lighthouse built to keep sailors safe from the jagged rocks. But in December of 1900, that light went out, and so did the men who kept it burning. When the relief vessel Hesperus arrived after days of rough seas, the captain expected to be greeted by the keepers. Instead, the island stood silent. The flag was not raised. The jetty was empty. As the landing party climbed the steps, a chill spread among them. The lighthouse doors were unlocked. Inside, the kitchen table was set for a meal. Bread half-eaten, meat congealed on the plate. The clock had stopped. 2 sets of oilskins were missing, but the third still hung on its hook. The logbook entries ended abruptly on December 15th. The final line read simply, "Storm ended, sea calm, God is over all." And then, nothing. No keepers, no bodies, no footprints leading to the cliffs. Just an empty lighthouse, perfectly intact, yet stripped of the men who gave it life. The disappearance of Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur became one of the most enduring mysteries of the sea. Some claimed they were swept away by waves. Others whispered of violence among them, and still more spoke of darker forces, of voices in the wind, and a curse that had haunted the Isles for centuries. Tonight, we open their final diary. We walk through their empty rooms, and we listen to the silence left behind. This is the story of the Vanished Lighthouse Keeper. It was the duty of the lighthouse to shine each night without fail. For ships in the North Atlantic, it was a lifeline. But on December 15th, 1900, sailors at sea looked toward the Flannan Isles and saw only darkness. The light had gone out. At first, they assumed it was a fault in the machinery, a temporary failure. Yet as hours turned into days, unease spread across the waters. By December 26th, the relief vessel Hesperus finally reached the Isles. The sea had calmed, but the mood was tense. As the men approached, they noted small details that unsettled them. No flag on the mast, no sign of activity on the pier, no keeper waving from the cliffs. Stepping onto the island, they climbed the stone steps that wound up toward the lighthouse. The air was sharp, the wind cutting through them like knives. When they reached the tower, the doors were unlocked. Inside, the rooms were eerily orderly, beds neatly made. The kitchen table set, as if someone had just stepped away. But there was no one. The missing men, Marshall, Ducat, and MacArthur, were nowhere to be found. Not in the tower, not on the grounds. The only clues were unsettling in their simplicity. 2 sets of coats missing, one left behind. A logbook ending mid-sentence. And silence, so deep it seemed to press against the ears of the searchers. For the men of the Hesperus, the discovery was like stepping into a ghost story. There were no bodies, no screams, no wreckage. Just the unsettling impression that 3 men had stood up from their chairs, walked out into the storm, and vanished into nothing. Thomas Marshall, James Ducat, and Donald MacArthur. 3 men bound together not by choice, but by duty. They were the guardians of the light, chosen to live in isolation on a rocky island where the sea was both companion and enemy. James Ducat was the principal keeper, an experienced man in his 40s, respected by his peers and father to 3 children who waited anxiously on the mainland. Thomas Marshall was younger, diligent, and eager to prove himself. And Donald MacArthur, the 3rd keeper, was not even supposed to be there. He had been called in as a temporary replacement, a man known in his village for his fiery temper, often quick to anger but equally quick to laugh. For weeks, the 3 men endured storms that lashed the island. The logbook described gales of unusual strength, waves smashing against the cliffs with a force that made the entire tower tremble. On December 12th, Marshall wrote that the storm was the worst in 20 years. He noted that Ducat was unusually quiet, and MacArthur had broken down in tears. Strange behavior for a man of the sea. By the 13th, the entries grew more desperate. Storm still raging, cannot keep lantern lit, men praying constantly. I have never seen such fear. And on the 15th, the final note, storm ended, sea calm, God is over all. After that, the pen fell silent. It was this mixture of routine duty and sudden terror that has puzzled investigators for over a century. Why would seasoned keepers, men accustomed to the fury of the sea, show such uncharacteristic fear? Why would one of them cry? And why did all 3 vanish without a trace? Their absence turned the lighthouse from a place of safety into a monument of mystery. For every answer, there were more questions. And in the decades that followed, the legend of the 3 vanished keepers grew darker with every retelling. The official explanation was simple, almost too simple. The men had been swept away by the sea. Investigators pointed to the western landing, where ropes and equipment had been disturbed, as though the keepers had gone outside to secure their gear. A rogue wave, towering 30 meters high, could have struck the cliffs, dragging them all into the Atlantic. It was a story that made sense on paper. The Flannan Isles were notorious for their storms. Waves could crash over the highest rocks, swallowing anything in their path. And yet, there were holes in this theory. Why would all 3 men leave the safety of the tower at once? Why would they abandon a meal mid-bite, leaving the table set? Why did one coat remain on the peg inside? If only 2 had gone out, what happened to the 3rd? And then there was the question of the storm itself. The logbook spoke of ferocious winds, but weather records on the mainland reported nothing unusual. Could it be that the men were exaggerating? Or had they witnessed something the mainland never felt? Something localized, violent, and unexplainable. Seafarers know the sea can be merciless. A single mistake, a single moment of hesitation can end a life. Perhaps the men had tried to save each other, one following the other into the storm. A chain of tragedy. One slips, another tries to rescue, and all are lost. But if that were true, why was there no evidence? No bodies washed ashore, no fragments of clothing, no cries heard in the wind. Only silence. And so, while the sea remained the simplest explanation, it was also the least satisfying. It explained their absence, but not the strangeness that lingered inside those stone walls. The unanswered questions kept the story alive. long after the waves themselves had fallen still. There was another theory, darker and more human. Some whispered that the keepers had turned on one another. The isolation of the Flannan Isles was crushing. Weeks without contact, battered by storms, trapped in a tower of stone. It was enough to strain any mind. Donald MacArthur, the temporary keeper, was known for his temper. He was called the Occasional in records, and tales from his village spoke of brawls and quick fists. Could the tensions of the storm, the fear, the claustrophobic silence, have led to a quarrel that spiraled out of control? In this version of events, one man may have struck another. A fight could have spilled out onto the rocks where the sea was waiting. One body lost, then another, until the last stood alone. Some suggest the survivor, overcome with despair, might have thrown himself into the ocean, choosing the abyss over a lifetime of guilt. It was a story people wanted to believe, because it made the men human, flawed, desperate, tragic. But again, there was no evidence. Inside the lighthouse, everything was in order. No broken glass, no overturned chairs, no blood. It was as if the men had simply stood up from the table, left quietly, and never returned. Still, the whispers of violence persisted, carried by gossip and retold in pubs along the Scottish coast. They painted the lighthouse not as a place of duty, but as a prison. 3 men locked together, their fear growing, until the sea itself became the only escape. But the mystery of the Flannan Isles refused to rest on human weakness alone. For the islanders who had lived under the shadow of these rocks for generations, there were older stories, tales of things far beyond storms and quarrel. To the locals, the Flannan Isles had always been haunted. Long before the lighthouse was built, sailors spoke of strange lights flickering on the cliffs, of voices carried in the wind, of shapes moving in the mist. Fishermen avoided the rocks after dark, fearing the wrath of ancient spirits. When the keepers vanished, these old tales surged back to life. Some swore that the men had angered something that dwelled on the island, a force that had taken them as punishment. Others whispered of the sea itself as a living presence, jealous of the light that pierced its darkness and eager to reclaim what was stolen from it. One of the most chilling claims came from a villager who said he saw a strange glow over the island on the very night the men disappeared. He described it as a pale green flame, rising and falling like a heartbeat. Whether imagination or truth, the story clung to the mystery like seaweed to stone. And then there were the whispers. Literally. Visitors to the lighthouse in later years reported hearing faint voices in the wind. Some claimed the wind spoke names, others heard cries for help. Whether coincidence, suggestion, or something else entirely, the legend of the ghost keepers grew. To believe these tales is to accept that the men were not simply lost to nature or violence, but to something otherworldly, something that cannot be explained by rational thought. And perhaps that is why the story endures. Because while waves and quarrels can be understood, the unknown still terrifies us most of all. Today, the Flannan Isles Lighthouse is automated. No keepers live there. No human hands wind the lamps or log the weather. The stones stand silent, battered by the same winds, staring out over the same endless sea. More than a century has passed since Marshall, Ducat, and MacArthur vanished. And yet, their absence still lingers. Every theory, waves, quarrels, curses, offers pieces of an answer, but never the whole. No bodies were ever recovered. No conclusive evidence ever found. Only silence and questions. Theories continue to emerge. Some claim a rogue wave took them all. Others believe one man killed the others in madness. Some hold to the supernatural, the idea that the island itself demanded a sacrifice. But the truth remains out of reach, hidden behind the fog of time and the roar of the sea. Perhaps that is why the story endures. Because it was not just three men who vanished. It was certainty itself. And so the Flannan Isles remain a place of unanswered echoes, a reminder that not every story finds an ending. Sailors still pass by and glance toward the light, now unmanned, still shining. Some say if you stand on the cliffs in the dead of night, you can hear faint voices in the wind, men calling out from beyond the storm. And maybe, just maybe, the truth is still out there, waiting for the day the sea decides to give it back. Until then, the lighthouse stands as both a beacon and a tombstone, its light piercing the darkness, its silence speaking louder than any storm. This was the story of the Vanished Lighthouse Keeper.